Hello and welcome to, an online reading and reflection. Back after a long pause. Since we've been allowed to return to church in person, I haven't bothered uploading these videos because people can come on a Sunday, see it live. But it's been rather, I suppose, flattering, really. Several people have asked me, would I do it again? Would I resume uploading content? And as I said, it's nice to be asked, but also it's another way, it's another medium, it's another channel to reach people. Maybe this has reached you, and maybe you haven't been in church, can't come to church, whatever. Anyway, so it's keep this stream running. People asked me, and as I said, it was nice to be asked. We're going to look today at Psalm 22. Psalm 22, and I'm going to put the text of the psalm in the comments below because you will probably want to read it and refer to it, but I'll be quoting it anyway. So we'll be meeting the text as we look at what it says. But if you want the overview, then in the comments below. Now, let's see. Psalm 22. If I was to say to you, my God, why have you forsaken me? Would you know where that quote came from? Well, probably you're going to think Psalm 22. But it was said famously by Jesus on the cross, dying painfully and publicly. My God, why have you forsaken me? And when Jesus says that, he's quoting the first line of Psalm 22, which is posed as this question. Where has God gone? Why? Why has God gone? Why have you forsaken me? And the structure of Psalm 22 is quite distinctive. It's about 31 verses long, and the first two-thirds, pretty much exactly the first two-thirds, are pain and problems. The author is under attack from multiple enemies, and God is far away, deaf, distant. But then in the third and final section, the third, the last 10 verses, it's 30 verses long, 20 verses of problems and pain, of lament and grief. And then in the last 10 verses, it flips. And it becomes about joy, praise, thanks, worship. God hears. And God comes to the rescue. And God saves this person from this calamity, series of calamities. And the problems are multiple and manifold. This person writing, speaking the psalm, the author, is under attack from any number of directions and seems to be psychologically and physically unwell, ill, weak, in pain. He talks about his own body as being shriveled up. He can count his bones. He's wasting away, physically losing weight, weak. He talks about his mouth being dried up like sun-baked clay so that his tongue sticks to the roof of his mouth. Psychologically and physically, this person is in a bad way. And then this person also seems to have a great deal of opposition, of enemies who are unjustifiably out to get him, sometimes with a direct attack and sometimes with sort of malicious gossip and mocking and more indirect, but no less painful. Sticks and stones may break my bones. And people who say the second part of that sentence, but words can never hurt me, well, that's just nonsense. I've been hurt far worse sometimes by words than by any physical assault or injury. So anyway, there's the structure of Psalm 22. It's in 3 thirds, as it were. The first 2 thirds just lost in lament. And the final third, turn a corner. The sun has come up. God has heard, answered, and acted. Animals appear in Psalm 22. Now that might be a strange little diversion. Animals, what type of animals? The author describes himself in verse 6 as a worm. He says, I'm not a person anymore. I'm no longer a human being. I'm a maggot. I'm an earthworm and I'm an insect. That's how low and small and horrible he feels. I mean, I don't know how you feel about worms, maggots, but it's not, you wouldn't want to compare somebody to one, and you wouldn't want to be one yourself. But that's what he says. He says, I'm no longer a man, I'm a worm. And then he describes his enemies as three types of animals. Bulls with vicious horns. Lions that can rip and tear and hunt down their prey. And thirdly, wolves or wild dogs. And these are the three different groups that seem to be against him. Three different categories of opposition. The bulls, the lions, and the wild dogs. And they're encircling him like packs. They're hunting him down. They're goring and gouging at his flesh. These are fearsome and dangerous beasts. We also meet opposites in this psalm. Night and day. I mean, verse 2. We've heard verse 1. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from me when I cry out to you? And then verse 2 goes on. My God, I call out to you in the daytime, but you do not answer. I cry out at night, and I get no rest. Night and day are both alike to this person. Unable to sleep at night, unable to be peaceful and productive during the day, exhausting herself in petitioning, pleading with a God who seems to be deaf, distant, utterly absent. And that's the other thing that we see is nearness and farness. Verse 11, God, do not be far from me now when trouble is so close. God is a long way away, but the problems and the people giving him grief, they are very close indeed, but God is distant. We also see other dichotomies, contrasts. The past, as mentioned, the ancestors. The psalmist says, God, in the past, with my parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and the history of Israel and of the Jews and the patriarchs and the prophets, you've heard and you've acted, you've answered. But me, where are you? What's going on? Why me? Why now? But he also talks about the future. In the future, my descendants, my offspring, those who come after me, they too will have their prayers heard and answered. They will offer you, God, thanks and praise. But here am I. The present is not a good place to be. The past, the future, but the present, me, here, now, not good. Another contrast we get, and this is unique in Psalm 22, is the living and the dead. The living and the dead. This psalm is unique in referring to the dead as being capable of thanking and praising and worshipping God. In fact, being capable of anything. In general, the New Testament's view of what happens after death is a very vague and uncertain one. It takes the approach that because we don't really know about the afterlife, if indeed there is an afterlife, then the less said about it, the better. Look through the Old Testament, the whole chunk of the Hebrew Bible before Jesus arrives, and there is some development. By the end of it, by the later writings, there's a hint that maybe people go and be with God or live on in some form. But on the whole, certainly early on, it's really not touched on, it's not spoken about, and always there's this vagueness, this uncertainty. It's an unknown, and whereof we cannot speak, thereof we must remain silent. So there's not even the sort of speculation, not the hope or the fear. It's just kind of blank, kind of grey. But in this psalm, the dead themselves are exhorted, encouraged, are able, in fact, to give God thanks and praise and worship, to enjoy his presence, to be still his people. And that, as I said, unique among the psalms. In fact, many psalms actually use this as a bargaining chip with God. And they'll say to God, Lord, come and help me, come and rescue me, come and save me, because what good will I be to you or to anyone else when I'm dead? The dead, they don't thank you and praise you. The dead, they don't engage with you in any way. They're of no use to anyone, God or other people. So, Lord, don't let me die, because then it's the end of everything. Save me so that I can love you, worship you, praise you, and be of use to others as well. Life on earth is really all that matters, is all the life there is, but not in Psalm 22. And that takes us neatly to finish up with Jesus in Psalm 22, we started by saying that on the cross, Jesus' words are that opening question in Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why, God? Where have you gone and why? But before we even get to the first line, that opening question in Psalm 22, we've already had two hints of Jesus. First of all, we see it's a Psalm of David. A Psalm of David. And David, of course, is the most illustrious ancestor of Jesus. And David himself prophesies that there will come after him in his family tree, among his descendants, will be one who will be the king. Capital T, capital K, the King of Kings, the greatest of kings. Now, David, he was a really good king. He was probably the best king Israel had. He lived about 1,000 years BC, so 1,000 years before Jesus. He's a good guy. Not perfect, but good. I mean, for example, he commits adultery and murder. Now, not great, right? Okay. But still, basically a guy who wants to do the right thing and who governs the people wisely and well. But he foretells that among his descendants at some point, sometime down the line, will be the king. So we've got this psalm that mentions David at the very top. It's a psalm of David, and Jesus comes down from the line of David. But also we have a strange thing at the beginning of Psalm 22. We're told of David, the morning star. What does that mean? The morning star? Nobody knows. Could be, and possibly is, the tune to which these words could have been chanted or sung. It's a guide to the choir master or to the musicians. This is the tune, this is the setting that will fit these words, that these words will fit. But here's an interesting thing. Of David, the morning star, Revelation chapter 22, verse 16, right at the end of the Bible. Here's Jesus speaking. I, Jesus, am David's root and offspring, and I am the bright morning star. Wow. So before we even break into the psalm properly, with that opening question, there in the title of David, the morning star, we have two hints. What we could call, in fancy theological language, we would call them Christological foreshadowings, predictions, prophecies, clues that Christ is going to be present in this. And indeed, then we see that the whole thing is quoted throughout, not the whole thing, much of Psalm 22 is quoted throughout the Gospels and seems to apply specifically to the death and the resurrection of Jesus. Verse 7 of Psalm 22, they hurled insults and shook their heads. Well, that's quoted by Mark and Matthew in their accounts of the crucifixion. And then the idea that people will hurl insults at Jesus. You're supposed to be the Son of God. Well, let God rescue you. Those insults, those very specific, particular insults, are a quote from Psalm 22, and Matthew mentions them. One of the guys being executed next to Jesus himself uses that line. You are so-called God's friend. Well, where's your God now? Let him rescue you. Then we have some really specific particulars. In Psalm 22, we read that this person who's suffering has his clothes shared out among his oppressors, his persecutors. How do they share them out? They cast lots for them, maybe roll dice or gamble or toss a coin. That's a really specific thing, and we see it in Mark and Matthew and Luke and John. All four Gospels quote verse 18 of Psalm 22 because it's what the soldiers did. There's Jesus dying on the cross, and the soldiers who've put him there, they don't know what to do with the stuff that he owned, which isn't a whole lot of stuff. It's basically the clothes he stood up in, so they gamble for them. They gambled for them. And then perhaps most strikingly of all is verse 16. Psalm 22, verse 16. They have pierced my hands and my feet. They have pierced my hands and my feet. What does that sound like to you? So, there's Psalm 22. A very brief overview, a quick exploration, lots to think about, worth reading. It's in the comments below. God bless you.